Ireland-Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce Aviation event.
On behalf of the Ireland-Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce, welcome this evening to this aviation event. We all travel a lot, I think. Those who've joined a little earlier were party to the discussions of the role Ireland has played in aviation history, from strange people landing on our shore way back over 100 years ago to the role in leasing and that. Luxembourg also, those of you who've been here a long time remember when the first low-cost flights from the US were Iceland Air coming into Luxembourg to then take advantage of Interrail. Because Luxembourg is so small, you could get on the free trains very quickly. So when you talk to Americans of a certain vintage, they all remember Luxembourg as their first point of arrival in Europe. So, however, COVID is affecting everybody. I mean, that's beyond a doubt. It's affected the aviation industry, and I think for me, as somebody who had to travel a lot, if I look at my own statistics, I'm way, way down compared with quote unquote a normal year. It seemed of interest to us that we would, and the Chamber, and I think based on the response that I'm seeing in the interest in this event, there is a lot of interest in what is the future of the industry. What we're trying to do this evening are two things. One is to talk about the impact on the industry itself, and I think Andrew will present some data on that. For those of you who want to take it a little further, I'd certainly recommend having a look at the Eurocontrol website. They do a wonderful job of tracking numbers, and if you want to get the full impact of how things are going, just go look at their site. The other part of that this evening is we also want to look at the knock-on effects. What are the effects on airports? And to that end, I think we've got an embarrassment of talent and knowledge from the industry here this evening. Our keynote speaker is Andrew Charlton. Andrew, please feel free, and I say this to all the others, if I omit something significant from my description of you, then please feel free to add it. Andrew runs an independent consultancy. It's based in Switzerland and Brussels. He's been in the industry a long, long time, it seems to me. He has really wide-ranging experience. He was chief legal officer for Qantas. He worked with IATA. He was responsible for government affairs there, and we just heard that he worked for CETA. His knowledge of the industry encyclopedic. However, I have to remember the first time I talked to Andrew, he got marooned somewhere in Portugal because of a volcano in Iceland. And his children went back to, I think, sort of the forest time and back to savagery while he was away, right?
Something like that.
Exactly. So, Andrew, welcome. Our two other speakers are, which are really our panelists this evening, really come more from the airport side of the business. Rennie Steinhaus started his career in Fraport, but I understand from my discussion, Rennie, that you actually started your career as a military pilot, and then moved through that. He worked in consultancy with A.T. Kearney. He tells me he's bought and sold airports. He loves his job at his jewel, which referring to Luxembourg Airport. And he's here to tell us really how Luxembourg Airport is dealing with the challenges of COVID. And that work really doesn't stop. Our third person is a good friend of mine, Colin Moran. We've known each other since university. Colin, he was part of the management committee of the Dublin Airports Authority, and he was the founder of the Dublin Airports Authority International. And in that capacity, really was involved in operating airports on behalf of clients in a number of countries, particularly Riyadh. He knows airports inside out. He was also in an earlier life responsible for maintenance, I believe, at Dublin Airport. In addition, and hence those of you with eagle eyes will see in the back a picture behind him of an aircraft overhead, the Aviva Stadium. He was the project manager on that, in addition to while he was at the Dublin Airports Authority being responsible for the development of Terminal 2 and also Cork and Dublin, Cork and Shannon redevelopment. That's our talent this evening. The format is Andrew will speak for about 30-40 minutes. I will ask the two panelists to add their insights on from their perspectives. We'll have some back and forth. I will take questions. So if you use the dialogue box to them, I will attempt to curate these questions and pass them to our panelists. But if you send them in preferably towards the end, it makes it easier for me to manage them. So without any more thing, unless any questions from any of our keynote speaker and panelists, I'm going to hand over to Andrew. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Joe, and good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. Again, as Joe said, those of you that were on earlier will have known that we already discussed just how important Ireland is to world aviation. So it seems only meet and right to come and talk to the Ireland Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce as well. Luxembourg equally, as Joe pointed out, having a very famous place in history, because that Luxembourg has that place is the accident of history that is the Chicago Convention. And no conversation about aviation, unfortunately, can escape its history, and no conversation about aviation can, well, certainly any conversation in which I'm involved in aviation will be fairly critical of the constrictures and the restraints which aviation still labours under from a convention written in 1944. 1944, think about it. The war was still going. It's more than 75 years old now, of course. I don't want to labour the Chicago Convention point for very long, but because we've got much more important things to talk about. But unfortunately, you can't talk about aviation without occasionally lapsing into that. I'm happy to, let me very quickly say the reason for that. Iceland Air had rights to fly from Iceland to the United States. It had rights to fly from Iceland to Luxembourg. It started selling flights from the United States to Europe by going through Luxembourg. It was doing then what Emirates Airlines and Etihad Airlines do today, known as the Sixth Freedom traffic. It did it first, and it's expanded from there. But unfortunately, the fact that I can even tell you that indicates that all these years later, and I mean that with no disrespect, all these years later, we're still labouring with that. Let me very quickly, though, set out the situation. Now, Joe, you have disabled me sharing my screen, and I've got a few very scary photographs to share with you. I knew I should have talked about this before we kicked off. I apologise, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. Let me just go on the gallery view there and see what I can do here.
I mean, I can hold it up to the camera, but that's not going to be very helpful.
Now this is maybe, let me just do one thing here. I'm going to make you the host for a moment.
Okay.
That should enable you.
I'll risk that.
And
will you risk it is more important. Here we go. That seems to be working. PowerPoint slide. There we go. Share. There's so many buttons. There's always one more button, isn't there? Okay.
Great. We can see it.
Good-o. That doesn't tell you anything. This, I hope, tells you a lot. These are the numbers from Eurocontrol for last week, week 47. Eurocontrol, another part of the famous Irish aviation mafia, run by Eamon Brennan, formerly of the Irish Aviation Authority as well. There's only one word to describe these numbers, and that is really awful. They are really shocking. The total number of flights as a percentage of last year's traffic is 36.4. There were 9,000 flights this week. Per day. It's really awful. There's practically nothing to say other than that. If you look to the sort of the chart in the middle right-hand side there, you'll see week on week at the moment, the number of flights that we're operating in Europe continues to fall. It fell as if off a cliff, of course, in about March, April. There was a bit of a bump of optimism a little bit across the summer as we thought maybe things might pick up a little bit. And then unfortunately, since then, we've had nothing but bad news, and further bad news, really. The largest airlines, if you look to the bottom row there, the largest airlines in Europe are mainly Turkish, by which I mean both Turkish at number 1 and Pegasus at number 3. And Ryanair in the middle there, but the number of flights they're operating is week on week, I hasten to add, 37.5% down in the case of Ryanair for last week compared to the week before. They're operating at something in the order of 20% of their total normal operating patterns at the moment. Some of the airlines down there, indeed, their numbers are so low they don't even pop up. Airlines like EasyJet and a few of those others are effectively not operating, for all intents and purposes, are not operating. The situation is seriously grim, and I'm sorry to say that, but it's best we face it head on. I think the situation that this presents us with, I think, is a series of options. One is to just cling on, look to governments to bail us out. The second is to try to drive for some sort of fundamental and structural reform, which brings me back, as I threatened I would, it brings me back to the discussion about the Chicago Convention. And our third option, I think, is to just, well, prayer. Maybe prayer is a good option. This is a couple of weeks old now, but this is up to the week of the 11th of November, same sort of information, effectively, number of flights by carriers going all the way down. I think there's only one way to describe this and these numbers, and these are grim and getting grimmer. If you'd prefer that in the United States, the situation isn't special to Europe, although it is special to more to the North Atlantic, and I'll talk about that in a minute, than it is to some of the others. This is the situation. This is outbound from the United States in October, year on year drops. The Mexico, the Dominican Republic are the only two with, suddenly we're going, oh, only a 39% reduction. That's okay. That's the situation we're now at, I'm afraid. And just in case you didn't, this is sort of the same, only in reverse. This is the passenger numbers and where they're coming from. But and it's fair to say, as it says, these numbers come, I should say, from Airlines for America, which is the American Airline Trade Association. Basically propelled by beach seekers and visiting friends and relatives. I'll come back to that in just a moment. So don't stop me if you don't mind, Joe, hosting, but let me stop sharing for a minute so that you can see me, because Joe told me he's not very keen on slideshows and those sorts of things, which is a problem for me because I've got a great face for radio. But to the extent that there is a skerrick of optimism in the horizon. On the horizon, of course, it's that there's a vaccine coming, and early signs are promising. Yes, they are, but I think there's a number of things. There's still grounds for some fairly a cautious measure of pessimism, if you like, or prudent measure of pessimism in what's going on. First of all, of course, the vaccine won't cure the problem. All it does is prevent the problem. It certainly won't stop a second or third wave this winter. And if you look at the figures in the United States at the moment, it's fair to say that some of the figures in the United States are redefining the word parabolic. They're vertiginous, but sadly vertiginously upwards, which means that at least until at some point somewhere, at least until somewhere, we're going to have continuing quarantine requirements, we're going to have continuing restrictions, we're going to have continuing limitations on what we can do. And I'll come back in a moment to the interesting comparison between what's going on in the United States and Europe considered as a whole and what's going on in Asia, where there is some interesting developments and interesting changes. But also, of course, even after the vaccine comes along, first of all, of course, the vaccine needs to be distributed to about 70-75% of the community before you get to herd immunity. I think that anybody who thinks that you get the vaccine jab and then wacko, you get to walk away and be free as a bird is living in a dream world, and we're going to need to get some serious levels. There's also airlines run by yet another Irishman, Qantas Airways, for example, where they are suggesting for the moment that you will need to have a vaccine before you can fly. Well, there's obviously a fairly interesting ethical question there as to whether frontline health workers or international travellers should get the vaccine first. Let's leave those aside. But the point remains that we are pinning a lot of hopes on the vaccines. Obviously, signs are good, but many of the vaccines that are out there are going to require fairly serious delivery problems, in that they need to be kept. In the case of the first one that was announced, the German one, kept at -80, which is a serious challenge. And distribution of vaccines is always a challenge, of course, because by definition a vaccine is live. So there's very short timeframes, and we have to work very hard to keep going to get the deliveries out there. It's good news for the cargo sector, which I'll come to in just a moment. But the interesting thing that seems to be going on is that so where are we? We've got, from an aviation perspective, we've got remarkably suppressed performance. But I think it's also fair to say that there's also remarkably suppressed demand. We're going to have a lockdown recession. I hate to say that. We've kept on trying to find ways to build new air bridges, but the problem with the air bridges seems to be that when you get to that other place, unless they've got the virus under control, you're in no better place. You've got to have a quarantine. Now, obviously, I'm speaking to the Irish Luxembourg group, and I'm an Australian, so I'm allowed to be rude to Britain at this moment. I mean, the worst bit about flying to Britain is, well, obviously you land in Britain for a start, but secondly, of course, then you've got to do the 14-day quarantine and so forth. The airline industry has spent a lot of time and a lot of energy telling you that flying is safe. We've got these fabulous filters, and you wear a mask, and all this stuff. And I accept and agree with every single word of that. I don't think, frankly, people are afraid to fly. I think people are afraid to arrive. The issue isn't the flight; it's the journey. It's where you get to once you get there. And and believe it or not, there aren't places worse than Britain. I mean, the worst thing happens is you land in Britain, where you can guarantee the weather's miserable and so is the food. But the most important part about that, I think what that drives us to, is that at the moment, if you look at the way it's working, as I said, in the United States and Europe as a whole, we seem to be working on we'll just let the health system cope with it sort of basis largely. But if you look at the places where it has been successful, thinking sort of geographically, China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, they have been very successful by having extraordinarily rigid boundaries, extraordinarily strict, absolutely limited numbers of passengers people can enter the country. In Australia, the number is ridiculously low, and I mean that ever so nicely. And New Zealand has effectively shut itself off from the rest of the world. What that's allowed is some domestic growth and some semblance of normality in the world. I mean, there were 50,000 people watched the Australian Rules Grand Final this year in Brisbane. 25,000 people watched the cricket the other day. Chinese aviation is back up to about 85% of its domestic traffic. So countries with a large domestic market and countries with a strong inbuilt domestic tourism industry are going to be in a better place than countries that aren't. Now, I think that has implications and ramifications for Europe as well, because I think Europe has the potential for brilliant domestic tourism, domestic defining Europe as a European, as a singular whole, if you like, the common European aviation market, if you wish. Europe has the potential to develop a lot of domestic tourism to replace the Chinese tourists, the American tourists, the Japanese tourists that were coming over. But I think we're at the very early stages of that development. So I think there's a lot of work to do in relation to that. But where I think all that goes is there is no hope at the moment. Oh, sorry, there is hope. There's only hope, but there's absolutely no delivery before, at the very earliest, in terms of comprehensive vaccine displays and what have you. There's really very little hope prior to, I'm sorry to say this, but prior to probably spring, at the very earliest, after Easter, maybe the summer. So, there's always one more button to push. There we go. This, though, is the European forecast. And again, to be fair to Eurocontrol, this was written prior to the first vaccine announcement. But frankly, I think it's very accurate. If you look at the three lines, and this is a test of your colour blindness as much as anything else, there's a green line, an orange line, and a red line. The green line is the one at the top. And it's the assumption that we have a vaccine at some stage in 21, and which I think is now fair, and I think that's right. And so it sees us getting back to 2019's traffic levels by 2024. And I think that's probably a fair, as forecasts go, I think that's fair and reasonable. I think that that's the sort of target we should be aiming at. So to come back to what I said early on, the question is, what are we going to do about that? Just one more slide for you, if I may. Actually, I've got one more after this, but it comes in a long time. The big winner in all of this, the one area where there has been some hope, and this is good news for Luxembourg as well, of course, is in the cargo area. Cargo has survived much better than anyone would have thought, and cargo will continue to be a really fundamental part of the delivery of the vaccines as well. As I say, it's very specialist, it's very complex. It needs refrigeration. Time is of the essence. We need multiple doses of it. So there will be continuing work to get the vaccines to where they need to be. And you'll see from the chart that cargo is really the only, my little group of photographs is obscuring my vision of that chart, but there we go. But cargo has a minor drop, and the rest of the industry has had a really quite significant drop. But one of the interesting things to note in this is that the cargo line here is a reference to all cargo aircraft that only fly cargo. Because historically, of course, you will know that some passenger aeroplanes also carry cargo. But I think it's fair to say that that the commercial aviation industry is only in cargo because aircraft are spherical. If they didn't have that round bit at the bottom, they wouldn't get into cargo. It's only that the space is there that they carry it. But they carry, well, in the before times, they carried about 45% of all cargo was carried in the bellies of the big aeroplanes. But a number of really interesting things are happening. And the most important of those is, and again, I'll come to this in a moment, that the big aircraft are being retired. And I believe airline fleets are going to change substantially and forever. And a lot of that belly capacity is going to go away forever. And so that will mean that there will be still more interesting developments going on in terms of developing big cargo aircraft rather than passenger aircraft. The other thing that I think is really interesting in this is what it says about the drone industry. I can see that this will be an enormous kick along for unmanned deliveries, not just drones, by which I mean, little small things that maybe carry up to 20 kilos or maybe even 5 kilos. But unmanned aviation more generally, and bear with me while I tell you an interesting story about that. FedEx, known to us all, FedEx purchased from Boeing 10 years ago now, maybe 10 years ago, a vast number. I think it was 80 777s from Boeing. And the first two of those that they purchased, they immediately gave back to Boeing and said, please make these unmanned. And the reason why they did that was because they worked out that if you take out all of the things on an aeroplane that you need to have if you've got humans on the aeroplane, which of course is air and water and heat and also food, but also all that stuff that pilots look at the front, a radio and radars and all that stuff. If you take all of the avionics out, you save, and the other stuff, you save about 10 tons, which is a huge amount of lift. And so FedEx has already been working in that area, and I think you'll find there'll be some interesting news coming out of that. In the meantime, FedEx has already started to use Cessna 2.8s to fly unmanned sectors from their big distribution centres down to smaller distribution centres. So so if you like, that's not the last mile, it's the second last mile of the delivery as they distribute things. And that's the area Amazon is also now working on most aggressively. I think this is going to accelerate the movement towards unmanned airspace, which I think is going to be a really interesting development. And I think makes for some interesting stuff. So where does that take us? Where I think this takes us is that we need more than a vaccine. We've got, I think for a little while longer, we're going to have strict border controls, strict quarantines. It's going to take a long time for the industry to come out of that. But I think one of the things that you can say about COVID is it hasn't changed anything. All it's done is accelerate it. It's accelerated everything. And the fact that we're meeting tonight by Zoom is a very fine example of that. The fact that we're meeting tonight by Zoom, of course, is terrible news for the aviation industry, but it's great that we can talk. And I think we should all be very, very So Marie, I've seen your question. It's an excellent question. Yes, there are, but I think what's going to happen is a lot of those aircraft are moving out. We're also seeing the interesting cost benefit factor of converting passenger aeroplanes into cargo aeroplanes, which of course will then be reversible. Most of the cargo aircraft that are still stored in Alice Springs, I've got a photo of them later, are actually your big old 4-engine burners. I think that big aircraft are coming down. I think that the cargo industry is moving along. I don't think it's not going upwards vertiginously either, unfortunately. But I do think what we're seeing now is the ability of the cargo industry to select newer, better, more efficient aircraft. So older, bigger, less efficient aircraft, I think, will stay in Alice Springs forever. Yes, cargo. Well, I think what will happen is those passenger planes being turned into what they call P-freighters or P-freighters. I never quite know how to pronounce that. Maybe we should ask Michelle Pfeiffer if she could say it for us. Is that they will be converted back eventually to passenger aeroplanes, because let me assure you, for every commercial airline in the world, if the choice is offloading a ton of cargo or 10 passengers, the cargo goes every single time. I can assure you passengers earn more than cargo. But I think what will happen is we will see a massive reshuffle in the way the fleet is working. So I hope in the short, I will get to fleets in a minute, I promise. I'm very conscious of the time. So just for the moment, I hope I've answered those questions well enough. If I can just drop back though for a moment. Historically in aviation, we talk about the market having three elements. There's the holiday market, there's the business market, and then there's this wonderful market called the VFR market, which for the pilots out there doesn't mean visual flight rules. The VFR market means visiting friends and relatives. I think that the tourism market is going to be impacted. As I said earlier, I think there's going to be a lot of regional travel. I think the push, driven in part by the environmental argument or the environmental discussion. And I don't think the environmentalists are going to give us a free kick because we're on our knees at the moment anyway, or give us a pass because we're on our knees. In fact, I'm sure that's not the case. I think there's going to be a move towards more train holidaying and shorter holidays, European holidays, shorter haul holidays, if you like. But I think the holiday market, there will always be a holiday market. People always want to get to the sun if they come from somewhere cold. I just think it will be impacted by the move towards trains, the move towards driving yourself, because that way you stay in your bubble, and so forth. So I see the holiday market. What will change that, of course, is that Mr. O'Leary, yet another Irishman, Mr. O'Leary at Ryanair will be pushing with very cheap fares. He'll be trying to force you out. The one thing that you can guarantee works to get passengers on an aeroplane is a cheap ticket. I can guarantee you that. I think business travel will be affected. It won't be killed. The fact that we're having this meeting tonight, as I say, is like that. But I think your procurement department will tell you, of course you can travel. Of course you can do business trips. You've got one a quarter. And that's what's going to change. And sometimes I say what I think that means is people are going to travel more like Australians, by which I don't mean you have to wear a Wallabies jumper and have an inflatable kangaroo and sing Timey Kangaroo Down Sport and drink a lot of beer. What I mean is that no Australian well, unless you work in an airline, no Australian flies from Sydney or Melbourne to London for a 4-hour meeting. If you've got a 4-hour meeting in London, you also then put in 5 other meetings, and then you go to Frankfurt for 3 days and you have a holiday and you spend a couple of days in Paris. You make more of your journey, and I can see that that's what's going to happen. People will be more intense in their travel. I think they will be pushed by budgetary constraints to reduce the amount of travel, but I don't think business travel goes away forever by any means. Please don't think that. And as I say, I think a lot of the holiday travel will also over time change, and we can't underestimate or discount, if you like, the impact also of the environmental issue, the environmental issues, the flug scam movement. The next generation, I think, is going to take slightly different views to some of this stuff. So if you like, that's the passengers. Here's what I think might happen with the airlines. The first thing that happens, I think, is that we've seen a remarkable change because of the regulatory structure. Airlines don't behave like normal companies. they have this government requirement, or they have this government interest, a lot of it owned, and so they do things which no normal business would do. Let me show you the single most scary slide of tonight, and I've shown you some pretty awful traffic figures. This is much worse. This is a figure from IATA. This is the situation for airlines on the 1st of January. There were 30 profitable airlines in the whole world, ladies and gentlemen, 30 profitable airlines. It's not like the aviation industry was in blossoming health and was suddenly had its legs cut off. The aviation industry has struggled, and it's struggled since the Wright boys, to be frank. And so we need to bear that in mind. And part of the reason why it struggled so badly is because of the regulatory structure. The most important components which limit and hinder that are that airlines can only fly between countries if the states have agreed to allow them to do so, hence the reference to Sixth Freedom flying from Iceland Air in the good old days. We get over that a little bit in places like Europe by creating a common market. We get over that a little bit by between the United States and Europe agreeing an open skies arrangement. But even in that more liberal environment, an airline can only operate between those two places if it's, and here I'm quoting, substantially owned and effectively controlled by the nationals, by the citizens of those two countries, well, in this case, the United States and all of Europe. But the ownership and control limitation means that an airline can't raise capital in accordance with the quality of its business plan. It can only raise capital in accordance with the liquidity of its citizens, which is a really ridiculous place to be put. And it means that you are constantly being required to satisfy national requirements. One of the problems, amongst the many problems with modern aviation, is this absolute requirement to put your national flag on the tail. That is a really awful way to behave. And it means that we end up with this very strong nationalist sort of appreciation of what's going on. And it meant that when the airlines suddenly hit the big COVID wall, they went rushing back to governments and asked for money, and the governments bailed them out. My fear is that the bailing out happened without anyone appreciating that actually the hole is below the waterline. And this is the evidence of that, that the hole is below the waterline. What we should be seeing, what we won't see, what we should be seeing is significant structural reform of the industry to allow for airlines to merge, to get rid of this sort of nationality thing, to stop British Airways having the word British on it, I guess, to allow airlines to create more hubs, to create a genuine international network. Because the second knock-on effect of all of this, of course, has been the calamitous impact it's had on airports. And the European Airport Association estimates there are 200 airports in Europe that are about to go broke. I'm not at all surprised. Airlines have dropped off all their flying. It's very difficult for a small airport to be profitable at the best of times. And we're now at a place where even for medium-sized airports, dare I say, their business model is going to have to change. I believe that airports, the airport model in the before times, the airport model in the old days was very strongly that they tried to attract as many airlines as possible to come to their airport. And they do that with some discounts and by saying what a marvellous place they were and so on and so on. I think in the future, if we have fewer airlines, oh, I'm the host now, I have to admit, Geraldine. If we have fewer airlines, the airports too will have less traffic. And I think that the airports are going to have to get to a place where instead of trying to attract as many airlines as possible, they're going to have to be as attractive as possible to the airlines. And they're going to have to try to offer better and better service. And that will break down further, I think, some of the restrictions in the Chicago Convention. Because, of course, the Chicago Convention, 1944, peace, love, brown rice, kerosene, preference for left-handers, all that stuff. You know, it's all very perfect. It's all very lovely and non-discriminatory. And I think what's going to happen is airports are going to have to start discriminating in favour of the airline that is spending most of the time flying to it. That will mean predictability. I think it will mean taking over the control tower so that they get to deliver service to the big airline that's flying to that airport in a way that delivers it the best and most interesting service that it can possibly have. I'll stop sharing that screen though now, I think, because it depresses me. I hope it probably depresses us all. One more photo, Joe, and then you can take back control. So I think that the airlines didn't behave as I thought they were originally. Originally, I thought there were four models that the airlines would go to. Either they would actually get sensible and we would have serious structural change. The second option was that we would go back to 1944. And sadly, that's largely where we've gone back to, where states have become owners of airlines again. I should have said this earlier. 1944, of course, almost every airline in the world was state-owned. The airports were all state-owned, of course. The air traffic control agencies were all state-owned. My big fear was we'd go back to 44 and that the states would get onto the registries and we'd see a huge surge in nationalism. And I think that's what we are seeing. We're seeing states demand that their airlines pay them their money back, that they behave in a way that is beneficial to the state as opposed to the aviation industry or to a competitive market. And I think that's a real problem. The third option is that we sort of get back to 1990, 1992, where there's a certain amount of deregulation, but we haven't gone into that sort of big jump of deregulation and liberalisation. And we're seeing a lot of that as well, of course, with very strict border controls and so forth. So, and I wish I hadn't said there were four options because I now can't think of the fourth one, but that's three, which is probably good enough for the moment. Unfortunately, the dream scenario, fourth option, of course, no change at all. And we just go back to 2019. Well, maybe by 2024, we'll be back to 2019. But unfortunately, the really best option, which is that we had deep-rooted, widespread structural change, looks like it's not going to happen. Instead, we've had governments throw money at airlines like there was no tomorrow, and not just. I'm completely relaxed about airlines getting money in a time of crisis, but I think we need to realise that when we're bailing out, we should only be bailing out the ones that matter. Looking at you, Alitalia. Looking at you, Alitalia. Absolutely, Marie. It's all about competitiveness and profitability rather than nationality, which is unfortunately looking at you, Alitalia. What we're doing. I mean, Alitalia is, I think, actually for proof that cockroaches can take the form of an airline, because after the Holocaust, after the disaster, Alitalia will still be flying and the cockroaches will still be walking around. They are the two certainties in life, even more certain than death and taxes, I think. So we should have used this as an opportunity to get rid of some of those airlines. I mean that ever so nicely. Had some of the best flights of my life on Alitalia. Gone to some of the best places. We should have used the opportunity to get rid of a lot of those sorts of things, to clean out our house, to do all that. Sadly, unfortunately, we didn't. However, let me just very quickly get onto fleets, because as ever, I've gone as long as I think I'm supposed to for time. What we are seeing, however, is a huge change. Even if we haven't seen the industry restructure, we're watching the airlines now restructure as hard as they can. They've retired all of their big aeroplanes. They've retired the A380s almost universally. The A340s and the A330s are effectively gone. The 747s have flown their last. You'll see them again at air shows and in museums and stuff, don't worry. And some of them will come back as big belly cargo players, but they'll be cargo aeroplanes. But basically all of the big aeroplanes are going. I think the 777-200 is too big. I think the 777-300 is too big. Maybe the 777X, which Boeing's still got on the drawing boards, will be fine. The 787 is a wonderful aeroplane and I think will survive, as will the A350, as long, particularly if they can make it a bit lighter. But if you're going to have to exercise any sort of social distancing, you're going to have to carry a lot of aeroplane around for the number of passengers you'll be carrying, particularly if or either social distancing or the quarantine rules, of course. So the A321LR, I think, is a really interesting aeroplane. What we're watching is massive changes. In other words, we're seeing thinner, I mean that nicely, small aircraft capable of flying thin routes, which in turn means that we're going to have less focus on hubs. I think there'll still be hubs, but I think the hubs will have less flights coming into them as we increasingly watch more and more of what we started talking about at the start of this, with the 6 freedom carriers effectively, we're going to see flights from, instead of having to fly from Manchester to London or Copenhagen to Frankfurt or whatever, you'll fly non-stop to where you need to go. Qantas, before times, Qantas was already flying non-stop from Perth to London. They were confident with the trip with the 78X they could get from Sydney to London. That gets rid of a hub, or that gets rid of Singapore or Bangkok or Dubai as hubs in any event. I think we'll see lots more of those sorts of thin routes and long thin flying. Passengers probably don't want a hub either, frankly, because of the risks and the non-social distancing and all those sorts of things. So I do think that we're going to see smaller airlines with fleets, with smaller fleets that will in turn be of smaller aircraft. So there will be a downsizing, which of course comes back to my point about the cargo airlines. I see that as an opportunity for cargo airlines, of course. It's better news. It's better news for the low-cost carriers, because I do think that sort of point-to-point model will continue. And in fact, a lot of gates will open up at a lot of airports. So that will be good. But it'll continue to put pressure, I think, on the airports and on the charges that airlines negotiate with airports for how much they have to pay. So I think that's really going to shake up the regional airport market as well. For a lot of small airports in small places, the problem with being a small regional airport is often that you're in a small region. And so if you're going to want to continue to have airlines fly to you, you'll probably need to fund that. In Europe, we call that a PSO, a public service obligation. I think there's every chance that that's where we'll see a lot of the smaller regional airports, which in turn will again be good news for the low-cost carriers, I think, rather than the big legacy carriers that will need to keep on hubbing back into their hubs to sustain whatever long-haul flights they've actually got. I promised you one last photograph, and so here we go. Bear with me while I just do what I've got to do. Well, no. There we go. This is a photograph of Alice Springs. You can tell from the red soil. There's not a lot of cargo aircraft in that particular photo, but gee, there's a lot of Singapore Airlines aircraft, Cathay aircraft, and Qantas aeroplanes as well, of course, and also Scoot, the Singapore Airlines subsidiary. So that's where I think the fleets are going to go. That's where that's going to land. How do I stop sharing? Oh, it's up here. So just now to very quickly perhaps come back to the last sort of thing, other assets that airlines own, I think slots are going to be interesting. There's, as I say, with fewer aircraft flying smaller networks, a lot of slots are going to come onto the market, which will start to devalue some of the slots that airports have, that airlines have in their portfolios at the moment. Although I do think slots at airports like Heathrow and Frankfurt and Paris and what have you will continue to be, there'll continue to be more requirement for those slots than there are slots available. So I think slot assets will diminish overall, but there will still be some very key ones. I think the other really interesting thing that has come up here, we've seen a lot of the American airlines scramble for cash by selling their frequent flyer schemes. In other words, the value that the passenger data has been realised. I think there will be continuing work to make you as precious as possible to the airlines if you are a frequent flyer. To sort of step back to the vision, I should have said at the start, I apologise. The vision I have of aviation is always that it is an ecosystem. The airlines, and IATA in particular, the airlines will tell you it's a value chain, that the only thing that matters is that the airlines are healthy and that everything else is just a support system. All they're supposed to do is support the airlines. I disagree with that completely. I suspect Renee agrees with my view. I think it's calm as well, no doubt. I think it's an ecosystem, and I think, you know, the little bird that plucks the fleas off the back of the rhinoceros is just as important as the rhinoceros. And without them, the rhinoceros dies. And I think that we don't have a healthy aviation industry until we've got healthy airports and healthy air navigation service providers and healthy caterers and healthy ground handlers and healthy airlines. Please don't get me wrong. Clearly, we've got to have those as well. The sort of bigger ecosystem, if you like, at the airports, I think their model has been thrown up in the air almost completely, particularly for the smaller, medium-sized airports. I think they're going to need to work much harder to provide the capacity to be a node in an airline network rather than simply being a magnet for as many airlines as possible. Clearly, what's going to happen is the health issues are going to become much more important. They're going to need to reshape the concourses and what have you. We are all going to have to travel with our health status. I think our health certificate will be as important as our visa. We'll be required to show our health status. There'll be that will change the way that suddenly the creation of security checkpoints change the way airports are. I think we'll have a health checkpoint as well. I think those sorts of things will happen. And I think that we'll probably need to move much more to some sort of reasonable PSO market, or PSO model, if you like, with public service obligations to help us understand how important airports are. And then the last little bit, the air navigation service providers, their model too has been completely destroyed, to which I can only say one thing, which is it's about bloody time. I think their model has been completely broken for a very long time. The current air navigation service model, ladies and gentlemen, is that we have a sector, as it's called, the space of airspace. If it costs €100 to stop the airplanes from going bang in the middle of that airspace, if 100 aeroplanes go through it, we charge them €1 each. If one aeroplane goes through it, we charge it €100. It's clearly not a lasting model. It's our business model, their business model is based entirely on nationality and sovereignty. Thank you, Chicago Convention. We set our radars to honour the borders. I just said something that you should find remarkable. We still control aeroplanes in the year of our Lord 2020 using radars and VHF radios. These are both World War I technologies, and yet we still do them. Satellites don't recognise national borders half as well as radars do. We are slowly moving to using more satellite surveillance and more satellite communications and what have you, but we still control aeroplanes as if the aeroplane is dumb and the only intelligence is the controller sitting on the ground. It's a lot like your mobile phone, where once upon a time, all the intelligence was in the exchange, and that has now moved out to the handset. All the intelligence has now moved out to the airplanes. The airplane is on about its 7th generation of avionics. We are now moving into the 3rd generation of air traffic control technologies, where generation 1 was blokes with flags and big fires. Generation 2 was radars and VHF radio, and generation 3, satellite digital communications. It's happening, but it's not happening very quickly. What will drive that, I think, more than anything, is going to be the drone stuff and what goes on there, because, of course, drones can communicate using our phone network, which changes a lot of the balance in all of that. So I think that we will end up, if you like, with airlines are in a place where they urgently need money, they urgently need capital and debt. What's going to happen once the vaccine comes back? We're going to see a rush of airlines selling seats as quickly as they can, which is to say as cheaply as they can, to get revenue in. I think that will be a sugar rush. I think after that we'll end up at another place where either more capital will be required, or finally, eventually we'll get to a place where we get some more structural reorganisation. But that's my real hope. I think cargo is a little tiny ray of sunshine in all of this. And I particularly suggest that if you look at the UAV, the unmanned aerial vehicle area, in that in itself is going to be really exciting. I think that the green agenda hasn't gone away. The green agenda will continue to thrive. But I also think health processes are going to be quite an important part, and that's fairly depressing. And I apologise for that, Joe. But with that, I thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed for a wonderful walkthrough of all the issues here. Andrew, I think you may have to hand back control to me. I'm not sure I can take it back.
How do I do that?
That's a good question. If you click on my picture.
Your picture.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
first I've got to put you in gallery view, haven't I?
Gallery
There we
view.
go. Now I click on you. Yep. Okay.
There
Done
should
that.
be a little drop-down menu on the right-hand side.
Got it. Make host. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry for that.
No problem.
Cheers.
Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Rene with a simple expression, follow that.
Thank you, Joseph. So thank you, first of all, for the invitation. Because for me, the Irish community is a very important community because you are a very heavy frequent flyer community at our airport. And just when our meeting started, so short before 6, the last flight to Dublin departed with Luxair. So it's currently flying to Dublin, and we have still 3 flights a week. So you see, there's a strong link between Luxembourg and Ireland, and still these times you can fly 3 times a week with Luxair to Dublin in Ireland. Yeah, like Andrew said, the situation is a very special year. Believe me, I'm now more than 25 years in this industry, but I did not see something like this before. And especially also, I never had in this, we had some crises. There were, of course, September 11 or this volcano, which nobody can really spell. But all this was very short term. And I never saw that airports, and many airports, announce to reduce jobs, especially not in Germany, by 30%. So that's why this was for me also a sign that this is a structural change in our industry, because of airline reductions of jobs or saving, this we all were aware of, but airports and this number, and also in different regions, do these announcements was new to me. Luckily, we in Luxembourg are in a different situation. I can say a bit more about this later. Just to our numbers, the year started for passenger traffic very well. We were 10% above the year before in January, February, so all nice. Then you saw this developing story from China, and yeah, in March, nearly half of the traffic directly disappeared, and then to the end of March, all was at standstill. So in the end, my security boss and me met in this terminal completely empty. So the Q2 were at minus 97% traffic. So all the scheduled traffic was stopped, and there was also a unique situation. So we had start of summer season last weekend of March. So there was a first arrival of BA in the summer season, and this was also the last arrival of BA in the summer season. So I went here that March Sunday evening to watch this unique event of a first and last arrival of BA in a summer season in Luxembourg. But of course also to organize the arrival and departures, because you know we have to do a lot to keep you safe at travel. That's also what Andrew said, yes, correctly. As long as you travel, you don't care, and also the industry did a lot. But of course, if you are at your destination, so what happens there and how to get back? So these are all the what ifs and scenarios. Year to date, our passenger numbers are at minus 67. And this was, of course, you can see directly the 2 waves. Of course, in the first wave, March, April, completely shut down. End of May, Luxair restarted flights, and it started to ramp up. We had a nice August, September, and then with the second wave, October, November. Now currently we are at minus 84. So we have 16% of our 2019 November passenger numbers. I'm happy about every passenger I see here every morning or in the evening. But the good news is, of course, the wave now is much bigger than in March, but still we have this 16% of passengers. And this also Luxembourg, of course, because of this VFR traffic from Andrew. We have a strong VFR here in Luxembourg. Of course, 40% of our traffic was business driven, so of passengers business driven, but also a lot of VFR. Myself flying very often still to Berlin just last weekend, so I still also fly and feel very safe in the airports, in the planes, and in the car of my wife. But this is the most dangerous part of this travel then. So yeah, but of course, if you look forward, December, we may have some VFR traffic, of course, but far away from everything what we were used to in this industry. And then if we come to next year, so how do we see the future? I definitely believe in vaccination, absolutely. Why? You saw 3 weeks ago when there was this announcement of vaccination, just an announcement that there may be one, you saw the stock exchange and how all the aviation shares reacted. So not only me believing in this, it's the full industry. And why? I can come again with my wife because she said, but next year we fly, right? We fly more because I want to fly and I want to see. And a lot of people tell me, I don't want to sit home anymore. The first flight I can get, I don't even care where to, I will take it. So this is what I hear from many people. And that's why also, it's a human being. You see our nice meeting today, it's 2D. We don't have the nice chats with the coffee. So to be honest, as long, and I had also an interesting conference with a person from WebEx, a CEO from WebEx, and other representatives of this industry. And they said, yeah, your industry is dying and we take over. And said, guys, until I don't have a holodeck like in the enterprise, where I have the same experience, like traveling myself to there, meet the people in real 3D, enjoy the smell of different countries, and have this individual meetings, I don't believe that you will replace us. And anyway, enterprise is still flying even with holodeck. So that's why I believe in people. Humans want to, are community individuals, so they want to meet. And you can of course organize your business. You can arrange things with people you know, but starting a business or even conferences where it's about exchange, this needs to be live. And even you cannot collect miles and hotel points with WebEx meetings. And I was 8 years in consulting, so I was an extreme frequent flyer. I know what you guys want at my airport, but definitely you just do all the stress to, of course, have some miles and hotels afterwards. So this is the light at the end of the tunnel of your 12th flight in the week. And of course, I don't believe that it will all continue like before. So of course, all this new communication people got used to will cost us some growth, but still I believe in this industry and that it will grow. Our scenarios for the next year is we made it also dependent on this vaccination. So our base case, we have 3 scenarios like Eurocontrol is taking into account that we may have an effect of vaccination mid of the year. So that's why, of course, all our scenarios beginning of the year, January, February is same sour like November. But in our base case, we expect that, of course, the vaccinations and the development has a positive effect second half of this year. In our pessimistic case, we say maybe at the end of the year. So you don't want to know my pessimistic scenario. In an optimistic scenario, like you saw with Eurocontrol, we see effects in the second quarter. But of course, this is all glass ball. So currently, so I do still the forecast of our airport as CEO. So I did it as consultant in 2012, and it stood with me. Of course, we're a small airport. So this year I have my forecast version 12. Usually I do one and a review. Our industry is very predictable growth, and you just look at, okay, how was last year? So it's not that complicated, these glass balls. At the moment, I have version number 12 because it's really developing and there are so many influences. And that's why also all the forecasts that you see are really, from my point of view, interest driven. Because we have IATA, ACI, and they all say 24, 25, 26. We are so suffering. Why? Because, of course, there are discussions about money, subsidies, 1 billion in Germany to airports. So, of course, I cannot say, don't worry, next year everything is fine, because then I will not get anything from the cake that is distributed at the moment, like Andrew also nicely said, to many airlines. Of course, they have to say, we are suffering forever. On the other side, you see Michael O'Leary, which we just mentioned here, or EasyJet, Emirates, which say, oh, at the end of next year, our 380s are flying and they're all in the sky again. And also Ryanair says end of next year. Of course, they are saying this because they want to get more cake, more part of this market, more of this cake. So there are some parts of the industry which are just pushing, even for slots. So of course, it's an interesting discussion about slots. One part says, let's wait. And the others say, I want slots in Gatwick, so give me some of them because you had 3 flights last week. Of course, there are very different interests. And that's why also forecasts at the moment are very vague. And I never had such a situation where it's so different to predict the future. And I also said to my colleagues, in June, I did a pessimistic case for this year, taking into account that we will have more waves. But I did not believe that this will ever happen. And now we are directly on this pessimistic case for this year. So that's why first time that I really see 3 scenarios, and we first started with the base case, August, September, and then whoosh, we went down to our pessimistic case. So also this is new. Long term, like I said, we as Lux Airport believe in 23 because we have a lot of O&D market here. We have a strong O&D market. We believe that people will compensate for flights that they do long range to US or other markets to do it inner European. And there's also that you see that local or domestic flights are not so much affected. Of course, we have no domestic flights in Luxembourg. So there's not so much market for domestic, but of course, if you talk domestic, here are Germans flying to German airports, French to French airports, Belgium. So that's why we have a market of 5 countries here. But of course, we serve also indirect domestic market and domestic European markets. So that's why for us, 23 is still our positive scenarios to say we go back. I had consultants here for another project where I said, can you do a second check of my forecast? They were very close with the base case, pessimistic the same, but they came from a large airport, a hub airport, and they said, we don't believe in an optimistic case. So the optimistic case was a bit above my base case. And I said, guys, sorry, but we are a different airport here. Of course, hub airports will suffer. Completely, I agree with you, Andrew. So people want to fly direct, they want to avoid or reduce the contacts and of course also the stress levels. I come to this a bit later when we talk about our chances that we see in this crisis. Cargo, yes, correct, complete different story. And Luxembourg also there is a very unique airport because there are not so many airports that are really very, very much full freight airports. So our cargo that we have in the belly of aircraft, I can take our van from the air side and put it myself into this van. And I guess this is our belly freight for the year. So that's why all our freight in Luxembourg is full freight. And yes, we, especially also with Carglux here on the ground, at the moment see even a positive increase, more than 3% this year. But also there, I don't believe that this is forever. Belly is very competitive, and the cargo managers' lovely plane is the 777-300 because it has a cargo capacity which is amazing, and also 350s and 777X will play their role. And all these Middle East carriers are pushing for market share, are pushing for passenger flights. They even fly today just for competition. Nobody can tell how they do it, but they do it like Turkish Airlines. There's also a reason because they now are building up trust of passengers. They fly, and if you fly long range, if you get your flight 5 times cancelled and Qatar is flying, you remember this in the future. So there at the moment, Turkish, Qatar, Emirates are building up market share. I don't know on which business model they do it and pays for it, but this seems to be all according to competition rules when we saw the discussions in the past. But that's why cargo, as long as belly is down, definitely the next 3 years is party time, but we definitely see coming back competition from belly because, yeah, like you said, the shape of a 350 or 777 has a lot of space in the belly and this needs to be filled, and a lot of passenger routes on long range just work with cargo that pays its part on this route. On the other side, we have, of course, experts here in Luxembourg. So Carglux, there's a reason why Carglux is still on the market. There are 2 cargo airlines remaining in Europe. This is Lufthansa and this is Cargolux. Carglux is now flying 30 jumbos. So we are now the largest jumbo base in Europe at the moment. And of course, Lufthansa even reduced their fleet to nearly half because they had to refleet them. That's why there's a reason why we are a cargo hub in Luxembourg and why Carglux is so big. They already know how to handle cargo with care and how to handle special cargo. And this is the full freighter business. So all the volumes may go to belly, but if you have race horses, Formula 1 cars, helicopters or engines, which are of high value, or even vaccines, you do it with experts that take care that your freight comes with full care and on time to where you need it. So that's why I believe in our business model here in Luxembourg and cargo, but the competition will be tough. And regarding the questions that we see on the line, there were passenger on cargo aircraft here in Luxembourg. So Cargolux in the 70s, 80s had passengers on board of cargo jumbos. But of course, to do this, the logistics is much more complex than just a cargo plane because you need to handle the passengers. You have a flight attendant. Cargo aircraft usually are parked far away at the end on the cargo apron. So this is also not very easy to handle with the passengers. That's why there were a reason why they stopped it, because the few number of passengers that you had on these flights did not really pay for the cost in the end. And of course, you saw the last combis of KLM, they are leaving the fleet. And of course, if there would be a market, because also the development costs of such a plane, so if you would do now a combi 350 or 78, it costs a fortune to develop this. And there were even in the past not so many airlines buying this combi flights aircraft. So that's why, of course, never say never. There may be aircraft that combine this, but at the moment I still believe that passenger aircraft will carry cargo, but cargo aircraft, yeah, will remain with cargo. But also the other questions, so to be honest, our feeling is that everything what can carry cargo, even if it's a freighter or a freighter, Frachter in German, or freighter, so if, as long as the rates are so high that Qatar can fly 777-300 just using the belly, this is of course an interesting market, but of course also this will disappear because the cargo rates will go down. But we saw also, this is for unique for me, at 747-200F in Luxembourg recently. And this is a sign that everything what has wings and can open a door to put in cargo, even if other airlines operating A340-600s with hand loading, this is for a very short time with high rates, but not long term. That's why I don't see so many aircraft parked which can somehow carry cargo. And we have all of them here on the ground. So that's why I don't see that there are so many aircraft parked. But at Lux Airport, so it's not only COVID. So I'm sitting very long in the office because we have other projects here. That's why what's the chance in this crisis? So we are still preparing our runway project. So next year we start to renew our runway. We will build it on top of the old runway by night. So we are in the final of this tender. And there's a lot of work to prepare this and to do the runway renovation next year. Of course, it's the worst time to do this at the moment, but of course we could also not do it earlier because there was a huge technical program to do this 6-7 hours at night without affecting the traffic. And of course also the tender is something which you have to do according to rules and not just saying, can you come by and renovate my runway? So that's why, but also next year still with the forecast of traffic, it's also the passenger traffic will be less affected by this runway renovation. So also there I must say next year is a good year to do such a renovation. It was very quiet. You did not see it so directly, but of course in our news. So at the moment doing an operation at our open heart here at the airport. We completely exchange our baggage system. And you know what this means in an operating airport to exchange a baggage system. This is of course got me my gray hair here to prepare this. But at the moment, we looked at fallback solutions, and if we have two systems, one is now renewed, but it means one is completely out, and I have one old system running. So I was thinking, what happens if in the middle of a summer season, our baggage system fails? You are all aware of what this meant to other airports when a baggage system fails. There was nothing this year, so we have the first part already changed. The other part is at the moment unchanged. Our construction was slightly affected by the closures here, but now it's going forward and it helps us also to do this very quiet, and you don't even see that we change our baggage system completely. Then we implemented for our frequent flyers a fast lane. For 1 year, we do it in the test with only Luxair at the moment. So this is a project together with Luxair. First of all, of course, to attract business passengers to come back and not be afraid of flying. But on the other side, we can all now nicely grow into what comes with this fast lane. I don't want to see like London Terminal 2 in the past in Heathrow, that priority lane user waited longer than normal lane users. So that's why we can now grow into this. We just quickly had a chance to open it, and now we grow with our traffic into this concept. We did some other implementations, and then of course there's a question about business models. And this question that I see here, competition between the airports. So to be honest, our business model, so we have 4 million passengers back in 23 again, and we have cargo, and we are in the lucky situation that we are a regional airport that has a real estate environment, which is a dream. So we as Lux Airport are at the moment developing here an airport city, which normally airports like Frankfurt, Amsterdam, or Singapore are doing. And that's why definitely our core business model is still to be the infrastructure provider for passenger and cargo airlines, being the gate into the region. So this will not change. So that's why, of course, also, like Andrew said, for me, the most attractive thing for airlines as an airport is paying passengers. O&D passengers that I don't need to discuss with some airlines and other airports did, that I pay them something to fly because I did an airport and I have no airlines flying to me because there are no passengers. So here, of course, we have a very healthy catchment area. People want to fly to the greater region and to Luxembourg here in this location. So that's why our business model is, of course, based on paying O&D passengers, which is big enough with 4 million. And also cargo. We are there a large hub and top 5 in Europe. So it's, of course, the demand is here at this location. It's not artificial. It is true demand. And of course, normally, if you have an airport above 1 million passengers and you don't build castles and jet bridges and whatever, you can operate it profitable. This is, for me, the border, 1 million passengers. So that's why, for me, also the discussion, I don't believe in the story that 200 airports will get bankrupt because there are states behind. Just what we saw in Germany, 1 billion airlines. So there's very national or even local interests. Kassel Airport was built for millions in the north of Hesse, 80 kilometers away from another airport, which is not really profitable. So that's why, as long as these interests are there, I don't believe that airports will be closed or will get bankrupt. But of course, on the other side, does somebody ask if a rail system is profitable or a road system? So German highways, are they profitable? So that's why, for me, still airports are an investment in the development of regions, in accessibility. So I don't understand why everybody's looking at airports and punishing airports, but the railways in France and Germany are investing into systems where nobody asks, but this is profitable. So that's why there is a reason why Saarbrücken has an airport to be accessible and this state is paying for it. And there's reasons for other airports. So for me, this is, of course, the decision of every airport and owner if the business model is a profitable one, which is ours, or a sustainable one like ours, or if it's an investment into accessibility of regions which are not so easy accessible. And it takes a while to drive from Saarbrücken to Luxembourg, but that's why I don't question the airports around us. I just can say we understand ourselves as the airport for the greater region. Like I said, we are a multinational airport. People working here from all the countries around. Every country is really enjoying the accessibility through our airport, but of course, our demand is heavily driven by Luxembourg itself and by the cargo here in Luxembourg. But on the other side, we are very lucky to have real estate business here. We just opened Cargolux, the new headquarter, built by us, rented by Cargolux. The Sky Park you can see beside the terminal, we prepare the construction. So this makes us independent as an airport from, of course, regulated airport charges. And the airlines are sometimes a bit strange in the quality discussion and what they want to handle their passengers. It cannot be expensive and shiny enough, but when it comes to the discussion and the consultation that somebody has to pay for it, the same people have different opinions. That's why sometimes it's not clear to understand how this all has to be paid. But we are in a regulated market, and of course we are happy to have also businesses or part of our businesses which are independent of passenger traffic, because what this crisis also shows us, a huge part of our cost, aviation cost, where, and of course this is normal, is cross-subsidized from non-aviation revenues. But at the moment, if you look in our car parks, it's empty. If you look in our shops, it's closed because all this is passenger-driven. So they can at the moment not subsidize aviation costs to keep the airline tickets and the airline charges low because there's nothing. That's why real estate is a good business for every airport, and this is not invented by us now. This was already a part of our business model before. What are other chances in this crisis? So definitely, like I said, I don't go into this competition discussion with other airports, but our chance is definitely that we remain our position and our sustainable business model, and that other airports may be questioned. Yes, but I will not participate in this discussion. You may understand. On the other side, flying direct, Andrew, I fully agree with you. This is what we see and what we saw before. And for me, the Airbus A320-21XLR was from the beginning the dream aircraft, because there were several try and errors to fly long range, especially in New York, with wide bodies. And of course, I know this market. I know how many people wants to fly to New York from here, from the catchment area and onwards. And in the past, but also long-term future, a wide body needs to burn money as crazy that you, of course, have to stop this after 3 months. So all these attempts to fly with wide bodies out of the Luxembourgish market to New York, give me the money and leave it, to be honest. I'm happy to get the money, or you just throw it out of the window. But with this new long-range narrow-body aircraft, which we have every day on the ground here, it's just a new version which can fly long-range, but we need the XLR to get to the East Coast, which will come in 2 years. So this is an aircraft for me, which is, of course, a dream for a passenger to fly directly with such an aircraft, which is, of course, not designed like you know today, cramped to fly in Europe. No, there are normal business class seats, and you can fly directly out of this market to East Coast, for example. And I'm sure people that are living between Frankfurt and us will even say, oh, I go to Luxembourg because the car park is 100 meters away and it's half the price from Frankfurt, or even less. And it's relaxed to go through the airport. I take 5 minutes to go through security, another 100 meters, I go into the aircraft and I fly with a not overcrowded aircraft directly to New York. So that's why there I see definitely a chance for thin routes out of Luxembourg, not only to New York, but other routes which may come to us. But of course, when this industry is healthy again, because yes, this is a long-term story. The fleets which are grounded, you showed us the picture at the moment, this is structure to get all this running again. There will be airlines which will be very fast, like I said, Emirates, Qatar, and Ryanair and EasyJet. And the other airlines, of course, have to think, do they give market share or can they afford to compete? So that's why I see definitely a run when this all goes better here next year and the next years, but still this is so structural that it takes a while to ramp this up. Even if we all want to live in the future in planes, you cannot ramp up all this grounded aircraft in just a year. Okay, this was my short view from Luxembourg Airport. I'm happy to even ask or answer question later.
René, thank you very much indeed for that. I can see here lots of positive comments on what's already taking place. So for our last panelist this evening, I'm going to pass over to Colin Moran.
Thank you, Joe. It's difficult to follow Andrew and René with all those pearls of wisdom and experience.
We see your experience in your background, so don't travel so slower.
I think it might be interesting to consider the impact of COVID by starting with the difference between the airport business and the airline business. And the best analogy I've heard is, if we look at the pharmaceutical sector, and indeed, Andrew, we're lucky in Ireland to have a huge FDI base of all the big pharma companies in the world in Ireland. If I were to look at the business challenges facing Pfizer as a bulk pharmaceutical manufacturer versus the business challenges facing Boots, the high street chemist. So Boots in London, they're an inventory management business. And the challenges are about managing inventory, quick service, quick turnaround, obviously safety, hygiene, security. The challenges facing Pfizer are about massive capital investment, long-term return on research and development, expensive research and development. And indeed, the airport and the airline business are the same. The airline business is an inventory management business. You can start up an airline with 2 and 6 in your back pocket. You can lease all your aircraft in. You can contract in your cockpit crew, your cabin crew. You can contract out your MRO, your repairs and maintenance. The best description I ever heard of the airline business was given by Ross Perot. Indeed, Andrew, I worked with Alan Joyce in yield management in Aer Lingus many years ago. And Ross Perot, who subsequently went on to compete for president of America, no less, started yield management, where he came up with the concept of paying denied boarding compensation, that you just overbooked everything and then you paid people not to travel. So that's a classic description of having a full inventory. If you look at airports, most people don't realize that it is an incredibly capital intensive business. They have a hunger for capital. I looked after Shannon and Cork airports in my day. Those were under 3 million passengers. And every year we would have this row where they would come in looking for between 4 to 6 million capex to do nothing. That was on what I would call maintenance capex, where you really didn't see any new facilities. It was for runway work, lighting systems. Every 2 or 3 years, new security regulations came out requiring new equipment. So that capital intensity of the airport business is a huge factor. And how you fund that is one of the biggest challenges facing airports. And COVID has made that so much worse. The single till model of airports is pretty straightforward. It's all your operating expenses plus the cost of your capex. So that's your interest and depreciation, minus all your revenues from retail and from commercial. Divide the whole lot, put all that into the one pot, into the one till, divided by the number of passengers, and that gives you your aeronautical charge, your landing charges. And that should come out somewhere about 10 euros per passenger for a medium-sized airport, say from 15 million passengers upwards. So if I give an example of Dublin Airport, last year Dublin nearly hit $1 billion turnover, 935 million turnover. It has a capital program of 2 billion over the next 10 years. Now, when I did a master plan back in 2001, it had a capital program of 1.9 billion. It doesn't change. The program I did included Terminal 2, which was 600 million of that. Doesn't matter, new terminal or not. Now you have a whole bag of small to medium-sized projects totaling 2 billion. To fund that and to get any type of satisfactory working average cost of capital, if I were GIP or an infrastructure company, I'd want 11, 12, 13% to invest my money. At the moment, with the regulator, and you mentioned this, Rene, in Ireland, it's a regulated model. She reduced the landing charge from 1067 to 850. It's not even 6%, it's about 5.5%. It's not worth going into the business. And that was before COVID. What's happened with COVID? Yeah, your retail is dead as a duck in the water. Your commercial is pretty much dead as a duck, although believe it or not, Dublin Airport is actually using its car parks to park trucks that will be delayed by Brexit. So, every cloud has a silver lining. But your footfall is gone, your retail is gone, your commercial is gone. Your operating expenses have come down somewhat, but you can't turn off the HVAC. In fact, with COVID, you have to introduce more fresh air, so you can't even recover as much energy. One of those little negatives. You can reduce your staff within reason if you have a voluntary severance program or similar, but that costs money in the short term. So the big challenge for the industry, for the airport industry, it's short-term survival, the classic economic challenge versus long-term sustainability that Rennie was talking about. Because the other issue is that the governments of Europe haven't declared COVID-19 a force majeure. So in the recent growth scenario that all the airports were in, they have beaten out hard-nosed contracts with all the builders and constructors and consultants to deliver under a delay penalty. Now, none of those are going to slow it down, or else they're going to slow it down and rub their hands and put in a delay penalty on the airport authority looking for their money back. So you can't really delay that capex program significantly. You can try and negotiate a middle line and a compromise line, but you still have to, as Rene says, you still have to do your runway works, you still have to do your new facilities works, your security works, and all those other things. So I think there is a fundamental change coming. And not because he's an Irishman, but Michael O'Leary has been saying for some time that the airport business is going to become like the supermarket business, where a supplier to a supermarket chain now has to pay for shelf space. So we're going to have to go to airlines, I hope not really, on one knee and say, please, please, instead of you paying us landing charges, we, the airport operator, will pay you some sort of a stipend or some kind of payment for you to come to our airports. And secondly, Andrew, I also agree, Dublin has 65 airports, from the Emirates, the Etihads, the full service, long haul, wide body, or let me say large consignment aircraft, to the quick turnaround, low cost Ryanairs, to the mix and match Aer Lingus, British Airport. You can't do that any longer. I can't see that sustaining, because that requires such a diversity of facility and such a diversity of investment in different type of facilities that it makes it really, really difficult. So I think airports are going to become more specialist. Airlines are going to become even more specialist than they are at the moment, and they're going to have to talk more closely and get sensible regulation as opposed to populist regulation. That's all I've got, Joe. I hope that made sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm conscious of the time, and just as again saying from the feedback I'm seeing here on this, everybody's really enjoying this, and it's really fascinating for me, these insights that we're getting. What I would try to do is just looking at what we're seeing in chats and questions, just to summarize those. First of all, but before I do that, would any of the speakers like to comment on what somebody else has said, to agree or disagree with them or add something? Just go do a tour of the table. Andrew, back to you.
Thanks very much. First, Com, I really enjoyed that analogy between Boots and Pfizer. I think that's a really interesting and really good one. The very first time in my whole life I ever heard the word big pharma, or the expression big pharma, was at an Irish investment event when I was working for CETA. And I'm so Australian, I thought they meant, guys on tractors. I was looking for really large farmers with big farms, but it turns out he was actually talking about the pharmaceutical industry. It was quite a shock for me. It took a whole night to try to get my head around that. But I think your analogy is 100% correct. And Michael O'Leary has gone well past that point. He is making very clear that he expects to bring passengers to the airport for free, he expects to be paid to bring passengers to the airport because they will spend their money and he will be delivering them. And that's a model that we've seen in other places, of course. Most of the trains in Japan, certainly most of the suburban trains in Japan, are actually run by shopping centres. And they almost invariably terminate underneath a massive department store. Tokyu, which is a train line, is also a really famous supermarket line. Hankyu, same again. That whole thing of bringing your passengers in, or bringing your customers in, is really quite to be expected, I think. And I think that's clearly where the model's going to go. And I think that Mr. O'Leary, I interviewed Mr. O'Leary just the other day with Dalton Phillips, in fact, who is the CEO of Dublin Airport, who comes from the retail industry. Exactly. He worked for Waitrose, I think. Morrison's, I beg your pardon. Thank you. And that's exactly where we're going. I think there's no doubt about that. And Michael was saying very clearly he's going to look at for where his fleet will be deployed next year. It'll be at the airports that give him the best deal. Be under no misapprehension. Did you read my legs? Have you all heard that? The best deal, right? Was sort of, he was about as subtle as that too, I might add. Renee, you made the very good point that some of the big aircraft will come back, and I think the older A350s are going to go. I still think there's going to need to be more dedicated freighter space than relying on the bellies of the 350s, because I think as 350s, yeah, but certainly the 777s, I think they're going to get harder and harder. And just another point for everyone, for what it's worth, the A380 is a really interesting exception to this rule, because the A380 has so many passengers on board for the same amount of floor space that in fact there is no cargo space on an A380 because all the space is taken up with the suitcases. So in fact, the cargo market, I think, is where it's going to get really interesting. If I may, Joe, while I have the floor, Marie Morganville asked a couple of questions, which I only saw excerpts of as I was going along, but I now see that she's got much more complicated questions that call for answers than that. So, Marie, if you don't mind, instead of the bailout by governments, to what extent would a freeze on payments? That happened to some extent. Airlines were excused their air traffic control charges, for example. It causes knock-on effects down the industry, though. It's a massively complicated series of payments and non-payments and defaults and what have you, sort of cascade down from that. It's helping the aviation industry. I would like to see a little bit of tough love, to be very frank, and to see a bit more hard work going into making sure we have the right business models. And your question on unmanned flights and how does one deal with the in-flight issues and emergencies, Marie, if you've ever been on an aeroplane at night in the rain, you've already been on a pilotless aeroplane. That aeroplane was landed by the machine, let me assure you, not by the pilot. I think those are really minor issues. I think we've got, obviously they're major if it happens, don't get me wrong, you know, it'll only be an accident, well, I say only, but I think that the systems are becoming sufficiently sophisticated that actually it's often the human that's the problem on an aeroplane. They say modern aeroplane cockpits have got space for one man and one dog, where the dog's job is to make sure that the man doesn't touch anything and the man's job is to feed the dog. We are moving to places of incredible sophistication on board aeroplanes. In fact, I mean, an aeroplane can successfully control itself to within about 1 metre of its wingtips, but yet we still insist on putting runways 1 kilometre apart. Because that's how wide they need it to be. We need to start to have a little bit more sophisticated and complicated conversation about some of those things. And then your final question, which I know Renee also raised, what is my position in terms of competitiveness and productivity of competition between regional airports? In a perfect world, we would all sing in tune, wouldn't we? My view on that is that's why God invented competition law, and the worst thing we can do is try to reinvent competition law or reinvent aviation-specific competition law. I think that's a really stupid strategy. I take Renee's point that a lot of his competitor airports are just given vast amounts of money. I think we should stop that anyway. I think one of the issues with the state aid that we saw, and I didn't mention it, but I should have, one of the issues that we saw with all the state aid was massive distortion of the market. I'd like to get back to an undistorted market, and that would include in airports. And if Saarbrücken gets a lot of money, for a start, it ought to be transparent. It ought to be clear. It ought to be obvious that who's paying for it. And I think we should be trying to build as competitive a market for airports as we possibly can. And I'm very comfortable that Luxembourg Airport will do very well in a competitive environment. And that's where we should be going. I'm very much in favour of competition and so forth. So I hope I've resolved those outstanding questions. I hope I have. Marie, you're back. You're back. Wasn't there an emergency? Yes. No, only one pilot and the dog. We can't afford 2 pilots. They're much too expensive. Those fancy hats don't come cheap. Those fancy hats are expensive. Interestingly, I did see a thing recently, some Australian Qantas A380 pilots who had lost their jobs because they were A380 pilots and were now driving buses around Sydney. And those guys said, "Oh, you work so hard. You've got to concentrate all the time." And they get paid a fraction of what they were getting paid as pilots. And the Sunnies, you're absolutely right. But, you know, all that stuff is expensive. And you've got to run your own import-export industry, that business. That's the other thing you've got to do as a pilot. Let me tell you, I'm going to jump out now. I realise that I'm taking your time up. But when I was General Counsel of Qantas, one of the worst things that would happen would be you fly to London and the skipper would send his compliments down and ask you to come up to the flight deck. Because obviously flying Sydney-London, that's 2 14-hour sectors. And if this happened before the dinner had been served, and more importantly, the wine, you would have to go up to the flight deck and you'd have to get 14 hours of the benefit of the pilot's understanding of how he would have better run the airline than you did. non-stop. And of course, you weren't allowed to be rude and say, right, well, I think you're a complete moron. Can I please go back and have my dinner? That would have created an international incident or an industrial incident. So the best thing that happened from 9/11 was that they reinforced the cockpit door, and from now on, no one's allowed to go up onto the flight deck. I was so jealous of the General Counsel of Qantas that was there when that happened, because he didn't get the benefit of getting the opinion of pilots for the entire journey, which is obviously fantastic and I love it, etc. But and pilots are very important people, blah, blah, blah. But frankly, so are bus drivers, and we should never forget that. So,
Andrew, I'm going to have
I think I've now addressed all the questions. Joe.
Thanks. I'm going to have to, Renee and Colin, quick comments, because I'm conscious of our time. We scheduled this for a little over an hour, but it's been fascinating. Run.
So I see Saarbrücken differently in other airports. So there's an airport, Rostock-Lage. It's at the Baltic Sea. I love to travel there, and I love to fly there. So I may spend 300 euros to fly there, but I spend much more in the hotel, which I would not reach otherwise. So that's why, for me, still airports are an investment of governments in a brighter view. So that's why I'm not sure if all airports need to be profitable. This is for me also an investment, and it pays back for the investor state, because people come which would not come. The second thing, your comments on Ryanair and the view of Michael O'Leary's view on the industry. Sorry, I would like to start more on the passenger part. Of course, Ryanair tells me that I have to get the passenger for free, so I would have to pay them something to bring passengers. I know the business model of airports very well, also of airlines, but so many shops I cannot install here that this pays for everything, all the passengers he brings me. But on the other side, to be honest, a flight from A to B is for me also a safe travel. And for me still, I don't understand why it is profitable and it should work to pay 15 euros or 40 euros for a flight from A to B, and the taxi costs me 50 euros. So that's why for me, we all should ask ourselves, what is it worth for me to fly in a sustainable industry, which will also last for longer? And I, as an airport, have to invest into an infrastructure. So I should take decisions for 30, 40 years. Michael O'Leary takes decisions for its fleet, and there's a very movable asset, and they can take decisions like this. And I invest into a terminal, I'm stuck for 40 years. So sorry, tickets, so 15, I call them 15 euro passengers. Not sure if I need every 15 euro ticket passenger at my airport, and if I want to invest in an airport when I can lose all the traffic next year. So that's why I don't believe that this is the future of aviation. This is one business model, but there are several other airlines which still have a different business model, and I'm happy that we have a nice portfolio at our airport, which is made out of all these airlines.
Look, Joe,
sorry, Colin.
Okay, go on. No, I think, Renee, you hit a very strong point there, that if people were to consider airports as economic engines, so I know that happened in other numbers for Dublin Airport. There are 18,000 people employed at Dublin Airport, not by the Airport Authority and not by the airlines. So there's 18,000 people employed in other industries clustered around Dublin Airport because of the infrastructure and the access and all the rest of it that an airport brings. And I mentioned the pharma industry. The pharmaceutical industry in Ireland get grants for going to the bathroom, they get grants for everything. And the airport industry doesn't now. I don't want to be whinging on about getting a grant, but they are very significant economic engines. And in fact, that's what Shannon, which is now part of a Shannon development group, is building itself on. I think the other point is that I happened, just by timing, to be developing the master plan for Dublin Airport in 2001 when the terrible 9/11 tragedy happened. And we were working with two companies, Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, who, as it happened, developed the master plan for the Twin Towers subsequently. And TPS Consultant, a famous British engineering company. And we had our own team. And everybody, with one exception, said, cut back your projections, cut back your forecasts, reduce your capital. And in fact, Declan Collier, the then chief executive, who subsequently went on to sell London City Airport for a nice little amount of money, said, no, 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 no. And he actually said, increase your projections. And I have to say, that's what happened and so many people said, I'll never fly again. The industry will change fundamentally. Now, the industry did change pretty dramatically. All the security came in, all the delays came in, and it probably took 5 or 6 years really to wash them out to get it all working smoothly and properly. So, double decompression on igloos happened in the cargo business. I mean, all sorts of changes happened that people didn't even see. But even allowing for that, the industry grew, and it still grew faster than GDP growth, or plus GDP plus 1% or whatever it's meant to be. So I am hopeful. I take everything you say, Andrew, that business travel will reduce, VFR will change somewhat, and vacation travel will also change in nature. But I still think it will grow, and it will grow again. And I live in hope. Yeah. And with the vaccine coming out, hopefully it's going to be a great 2021.
Of course, we've got a lot of issues overlapping here, haven't we? I mean, part of the reason why it'll come back, and I agree, I'm sure it'll come back. Part of the reason why it'll come back, though, is because there'll be a lot of cheap tickets in the market, which brings us back to the conversation and Renee's comments on sustainability. And I completely agree with those comments as well. The €15 punter, who is a €15 punter on a marginally costed basis, is different to the €15 first passenger onto the aeroplane, but we need him to get on the aeroplane to sustain the growth that we all need, because we all think. And at which point I note the comment from Fergal that talks about the fuel tax. I think fuel tax is inevitable. I think airfares are going to go up. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think that will then throw back to the first point Renee made in this second round, where he talked about spending €300 to fly somewhere and then spending a week. I completely agree with that. I think airports, that the whole state aid rules for airports are wrong and need to be rebalanced, because at the moment the state aid rules is a test of would a commercial operator pay Ryanair to bring passengers. The trouble is, and you wouldn't as an airport pay, but you would if you look at the greater economy of the owners of the airport. In other words, usually the local council and the Chamber of Commerce and all those other things. So you absolutely would pay for it in exactly that reason. You €20 bonus, or €20 subsidy to a passenger, but they're now going to spend €2,000 a day. I completely agree with that. I think we've got wrong, and we've got it wrong because of the airlines' vested interest and a lot of Stockholm syndrome going on, is the whole interplay between state aid, competition, market distortion, and the whole subsidy thing. I did that as quick as I could, Joe, because I know you want to end.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
One last point which I need to answer, because there was one important question from Patrick regarding COVID testing when he flies to Dublin. So we at Lux Airport have a test station where you get a free PCR test at arrival. I cannot tell you what are the regulations when you arrive in Dublin. So please look into the authority pages, what they expect from you to travel to Dublin, if you can do the test at arrival in Dublin, or if you should do it before here in Luxembourg. My guess is you can do it before, because PCR test also takes a while. But please have a look at their website. But when you come back, so in Luxembourg at the airport, you can do a free PCR test. This I can tell you. About Dublin, please look at their website, because this is also changing every week. And there I'm not sure what are the requirements.
Ray, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Gentlemen, this has been fascinating. The fact that we've gone way over time and we still get vast majority of our audience still in there and hanging on every word. I will not attempt to summarize, that would be futile. All I can say is that this has been a fascinating event. I think anybody who steps on an airplane has found this fascinating, particularly those people who spend a lot of time on airplanes. But to everybody who's attended, thank you very much indeed. One last point, this is being recorded. We will put the recording through a link up on our website as soon as possible. So as that I know a number of people had to leave early, but also some people had struggled to get in time for commitments and other commitments. So we will put it up on the website. I will thank everybody again, particularly our participants who've taken the time to be involved and to commit, and the energy and enthusiasm, and certainly the diversity of views we've seen have been fascinating. So I'm going to close this now. Thank you very much indeed, and have a nice evening and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Next
you.
time. Next time in
Nice
Luxembourg.
evening, and hope to see you in real next time.
Yes.
Yes,
Next time in
Absolutely.
Luxembourg. Yeah.
Okay.
It was my pleasure.
That's
Thanks.
it.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks a million.
Thank you.